Hey guys, this is Anand Shimpi from AnandTech.com. We've got a full crowd here for episode 6 of the AnandTech podcast. Once again, we have Brian Klug, our senior smartphone editor, now back from Korea.
Hey guys.
And returning from the original crew is Dr. Ian Cuttress, our senior motherboard editor.
Hey, what's up?
So we have a lot to discuss. I promised at the end of last time that I'd talk a little bit more about Haswell. I apologize. I thought I'd have the Haswell architecture piece done by now. It's obviously not, but I can touch on a couple things there. Ian, you weren't around for our Haswell discussion initially. Did you get a chance to follow any of what came out of IDF, or are you still kind of waiting for more details to come out?
I think I'd follow a lot of people in saying that I'd like a lot, one big roundup when you get around to it.
Yeah.
Just so everything's all in one place.
So last week on the podcast, we kind of discussed the Haswell platform evolution, right? That we go, what Intel is doing to get down to, let's say 15 watts and then 10 watts and even further. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about Haswell here just because we have a packed schedule. But the two big things on the CPU side that are kind of new in Haswell, one is TSX, which is the whole transactional memory support that Haswell brings to the table, as well as the kind of traditional microarchitectural improvements. So I start with the latter first, right? So if you remember when we went to Conroe, Conroe effectively widened the front end of the machine and kind of went back to like an evolution of the Pentium Pro or the P6 generation. And then since then, there's kind of been replumbing done with Sandy Bridge. Kind of everything's been built off of that initial Conroe architecture with tweaks here and there. Nehalem brought us a memory controller and all this other stuff happened. So Haswell does like a significant expansion. Instead of just focusing on the front end, there are some front end improvements, but Haswell actually addresses the execution side of the engine, right? So you can have more instructions in flight. You can kind of, buffers are deeper, stuff like that. But we also get the addition of extra execution ports. So whereas Conroe kind of let you extract parallelism from the instruction stream, and subsequent generations improved on that, Haswell really helps extract additional parallelism from kind of the decoded, scheduled, about to be executed micro-op stream. So it's just continual improvements in various portions of the chain. And what we're seeing is, on average, you should be able to expect, compared to a identically clocked Ivy Bridge, somewhere in the 5 to 15% range increase in CPU performance, which actually doesn't sound like a lot. I mean, Sandy Bridge was what, about 20% overall, or am I remembering that too fondly?
No, I think that's right, isn't it?
It felt a bit more than 20% in my home machine, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, well, because Sandy Bridge combined like better turbo and a bunch of other stuff with it as well. But 5 to 15%, I don't know, Ian, is that like if you've averaged that out to a 10% bump on average, that doesn't sound significant enough for a lot of like the traditional kind of like hardcore desktop enthusiast community.
Well, going from Sandy to Ivy was in the region of about 5 to 10%, wasn't it? So add on another one. The point to consider here is if people are going to go straight from Sandy to Haswell, if the power improvements are there, then it may make sense.
Yeah, so one thing we talked about last week is that a lot of the power improvements obviously are platform level, but those platform level improvements are really focused on, a later version of Haswell or the Haswell platform. What desktop and notebook users see is kind of at most a 20% reduction in platform idle power. So you don't get the 20x reduction if you're using a desktop. At least not initially. I would assume at some point, we're going to get some really cool desktop form factors as well. And in terms of active power, I'm not sure, right? Like it's obviously you're doing more on the same process node. There's a lot of power gating and clock gating efficiencies that are included in Haswell, so it's possible that average power will go down. But I don't necessarily know that kind of full load power will be all that much better than Ivy Bridge. You're still at 22 nanometers, still the same process node. Obviously, you more experienced on the process node, so you might see some improvements there. And then the other major side to Haswell is TSX. So this is kind of interesting. It obviously resonates very, very well with And actually, Johan posted about this already. So folks in the enterprise space deal with this a lot, right? The idea is that when Intel did the Pentium 4, they discovered that, hey, look, you can't just keep ramping up clock speed and expect performance to scale indefinitely. So we started adding more cores in addition to improving IPC and increasing frequency. So the issue with adding more cores is not all applications obviously scale well with, across multiple cores. Those applications that do scale well, what happens when you have multiple cores accessing the same data structure? Like, you've got one table that 4 different cores are all writing to at the same time. The easiest thing to do from a developer perspective is when a bunch of cores want to access the same data structure, you lock the data structure and serialize the accesses, right? So, say, hey, 4 cores want to access this one data structure, only core 0 gets to access it first. When it's done doing its writing, then core 1 can go, core 2, core 3. It's great from a development standpoint, makes things super easy. It kind of sucks from a parallelism speed up standpoint, right? Because then effectively you get no speed up across multiple cores. The alternative to that is the developer has to go in and do some really, really fine-grained lock management, which puts a lot of burden on the developer. And honestly, that's one thing you're trying to avoid if you're trying to really push multi and many core scaling for kind of the future of computing. So Intel comes up with these extensions to the x86 ISA. TSX is what they're known as. And what they let you do is, in a Haswell system, if the developer includes, a couple of instructions that decode to no ops in traditional, pre-Haswell machines. So it doesn't break compatibility. But what they do is they tell the computer, they tell Haswell that, look, this next bit of code may run into some locking issues, right? We may have multiple cores accessing the same data structure. So Haswell, if you can, go in there and see if you can manage this on your own. So what the CPU will do is it'll sit there and say, okay, I've got 4 cores accessing the same data structure. Instead of assuming that they're all going to write to the same variable over and over again and screw everything up, let's just go ahead and speculatively execute all of this. And if there's no, overwriting of data, if everything works out fine, then we'll just commit the results to memory. We'll get a huge speed up and kind of move on. In the event that there is a problem, that's fine. We'll just re-execute the code all over again and kind of lock it traditionally, right? So you'll serialize the whole thing. This is super interesting for folks in the enterprise space. Obviously, folks running like 24 core servers, lots of potential benefit here. But there are also potentially big gains on the consumer side as well, right? Anything that uses P threads, any of the well-threaded consumer-based software packages out there can all benefit from this as well. This isn't something you'll see a huge performance improvement from on day one, but it's with all ISA changes, right? You have to do this, and then over the next couple of years, you'll start to see improvements. Ian, I know you do a lot of multi-thread development. I don't know how much any of this applies to you at all.
In a sense, not so much on my end. I don't really deal with data structures in that wider sense, more sort of individual elements, but millions of them.
Okay.
With all their own register addresses required for whatever data they're carrying.
I gotcha. So yeah, anyways, that's all super interesting. And that kind of rounds off what I wanted to talk about with Haswell this round. So after the podcast, I'm back to working on that architecture article. So I'm going to try and get that out this week. Moving on to the next big topic, obviously iPhone 5. Brian, you're back from Korea. You got your iPhone 5. Thoughts?
That's right.
What's your experience thus far?
Of the iPhone 5 or Korea?
We'll get to Korea in a second. I want to talk about the Optimus G.
Okay.
Let's talk iPhone 5 first.
Well, I mean, I think our impressions, or at least mine, are the same as what they were like when I was at the demo room. Honestly, nothing has really changed. It still feels, very thin, very light, kind of like an empty metal box in some ways. I mean, those 176 extra pixels or whatever in the vertical space do make a difference. But yeah, I find myself a little bit my excitement is tempered by the fact that there's no AT&T LTE here yet still.
Yeah.
And so for me that's like half the story.
Yeah.
So That's a little bit disappointing.
I'm actually surprised
But
that
there's no one else to blame but AT&T for that.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't. I mean, they seem to be pushing this like huge rollout in the couple of months leading to iPhone 5 launch, but I guess it's not as aggressive as we all would have hoped.
Well, they pushed out like the key markets that they didn't really have support for already, like Seattle, Portland. There were just a bunch, and that came literally in like 3 or 4 days there. But it seems like the rest of them were just going to have to wait. And I was told before December. But we'll see we'll see whether that works out. I haven't seen any test sites, and I've been driving around trying to find, where are going to be test sites. But
So-
I mean, that's sort of just my local thing. The bigger issue that I have right now is that there are so few apps updated that utilize the full vertical space that it's kind of annoying. And especially things like my IM client that I use a lot, hasn't been updated yet. And so the keyboard in the portrait mode gets shifted up. So you get letterboxed apps that are centered in both, portrait and landscape. So there's this vertical offset when you're typing, and that's just kind of annoying. But I mean, it's just little things that will get fixed.
Interesting. So I finally got to spend time holding the device. And I would say it ended up being, on average, I feel like it's heavier than I would expect. Just based on everyone kind of saying this, like the same thing, it feels very, very light, very hollow. But maybe because I'm also comparing it to a lot of the like polycarbonate phones out there.
Precisely.
It doesn't feel all that light. So I think, it's important to have perspective there. But it does make the previous model feel super freaking heavy.
It's because of all that glass. Yeah, there's just no way. There's no getting around the fact that the previous ones were heavy. So people that I talk to who only used a 4 or 4S are like, this feels like a child's toy. Like somebody told me yesterday, it feels like a child's toy.
Interesting.
And I was like, well, I strongly disagree. Like, I don't know what child's toys you're playing with. But yeah, it's going to feel much lighter if you're coming from that.
Yeah, but if you're coming from like a 1S or a 1X, it's not all that
Still
different.
Pretty beefy.
Yeah. But
I don't know. For me, that's the big thing is that, getting this extra row, like that's pretty cool. The other big, like there are two big pieces of that puzzle, and at least from my perspective, and one of them is, of course, the SoC, which is, Apple built the CPU. That's a pretty big deal. And the other one is LTE. And then I guess maybe like a third is the camera stuff, even though camera really isn't all that better. And supposedly there's this oversampling mode where it will give you a 2x2 bin on all the pixels in low light.
yeah.
But I can't make that happen. Like maybe I'm not doing it right. And it's supposed to like kick in by itself.
Interesting.
But I spent a lot of time yesterday tinkering around in, various low light environments, but I couldn't make that happen.
Interesting.
So who knows? I mean, that's supposedly there. That's pretty big stuff too. This is like, oversampling is what's done on the 808. So if it's really done right, then you can definitely get a significant low light improvement. But I just haven't seen it yet, which isn't to say that it doesn't exist, because it supposedly does exist.
Yeah. So admittedly, I haven't played with the camera that much. My focus has been almost entirely on SoC stuff. I've done a bit of LTE testing just driving around Raleigh, and of course, battery life testing. I've just been, ever since I got back from New York, it's just been trying to get, some good characterization of battery life on this device versus the previous gen, as well as some of the other Android devices that are out there.
Yeah, my impressions this far have only been on WCDMA.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what it looks like on LTE. Like a lot of people are saying that it's the same as the 4S.
In terms of battery life?
They sort of absorbed, the process gains and went for the same battery life with, obviously it's thinner.
Yeah. So it's so for people to understand, like we have this test that we use for battery life called Web Test, and we use that. Web Test version 1 actually debuted as a Mac battery life benchmark because we ran into this problem similar to what we have today in the smartphone space, where none of our battery tools work there, right? So Web Test 1 was a Mac benchmark. Web Test 2 and 3 ended up being revisions of that benchmark. WebTest 3 ended up being what we debuted in our smartphone tests years ago. And then we've kind of evolved that. So WebTest version 4 ends up being part of our 2012 tablet benchmark. And then for the iPhone, we kind of got this idea that, hey, look, maybe we should go a little more aggressive. And we had a 5th generation WebTest benchmark that we were going to kind of deploy here. And each of these benchmarks, the idea is that we want them to be very repeatable. And at the same time, we also want them to be very realistic and useful. So one problem with WebTest 3, and we kind of mentioned this in the 4S review last year, is that iOS does a great job, maybe too good of a job, of caching a lot of the elements that we use in that web page loading test. WebTest 4 fixed a lot of that. WebTest 5 basically makes it impossible to cache the majority of what's downloaded during the course of the test. So I've spent the past few days just running various revisions of WebTest 5 on this and trying to characterize battery life. In a super aggressive version of it that I don't think we're going to, effectively ship the review with, I came out with somewhere in the 5 to 6 hour range for a single charge on the 4S and 5. I got a little bit better battery life on the 5.
But there's a huge air interface difference, right? The 4S is on WCDMA, the 5 is on LTE. So, inherently... or did you run them both on WCDMA?
So I ran them. I ran it both ways, right? I ran them both at WCDMA as well as running the 5 on LTE. Okay. So I do kind of support the theory that at least Apple, I believe, claims same battery life for LTE and WCDMA, and these numbers kind of supported that in the worst case. I think because of how aggressive that test was. I don't know. Did you ever track how many gigabytes you used? I feel like it's over a gig just for that one test.
That test is super aggressive. I put in my second line in, and I got a data use warning. I'm up against my 5 gigs.
Yeah, so
like if I do another test, I'm going to get billed $10.
Yeah, so I toned that down because I thought that was a little bit aggressive. But so because of how data heavy that test was, I feel like LTE actually had a race to sleep advantage over WCDMA, so battery life was actually a bit longer on LTE. But this new version that we're debuting here, I guess WebTest 5 Beta 2, it tones that down a bit, and actually the phones are running right now. And I'm basically showing a 10% gap, or a 10% improvement, comparing WCDMA on the 4S versus LTE on the 5, so I have to go back and run it on WCDMA on the 5 as well. But it does seem, the 5 does seem to be a little better. I don't know if it's necessarily like significantly better, and I don't know how it compares to the 4 yet.
Yeah, I'll run that because I still have the 4 kicking around.
So that's what I've kind of been struggling with now. And I ran WebTest 4, so I also ran our tablet battery life test on there. And I got around 8.5 hours on, I think, both WCDMA and LTE. Yeah, actually, in that one, I think it was like 8 hours, 20-ish minutes on LTE, and then just about 8 hours on WCDMA on the 5.
Interesting.
So
I have to run that on some other Android devices too.
Yeah, well, my hope is if this new rev of the 5th gen test works out well, then we can just skip WebTest 4 altogether and just move to that. But I'll know more by the end of tonight, basically. And then on the SoC side, the big discovery there was that we were wrong about kind of peak loaded clock speed. The original Geekbench data pointed to a gigahertz for both cores, but depending on how you load it, I can get 1.2. Not a huge difference. Makes the gains in IPC a little more reasonable, or realistic, I guess. But yeah,
I love how with Geekbench you have to do that. It shows it to you on its first load up. And that's it, unless you force quit it.
Correct. Well, we saw that actually, and the only reason I thought to look for that is because that's a rookie mistake that even the PC apps used to do too, right? Like they would just grab clock speed at start and then report that at what the clock speed happens to be for the rest of the run. And then so I I ran I guess I was downloading an application in the background, and then I launched Geekbench while that was happening, and that's how I got it to bump up to 1.2.
Interesting. Well, I saw tethering too.
Yeah, so tethering sometimes would do it. Yeah, there was just a bunch of stuff that I would try and do in the background to kind of load the cores up to get them to increase their frequency, and then load up Geekbench after that.
Can I just say I'm not a huge fan of Geekbench yet?
Yeah, it's what are your complaints about it?
Stuff like this, and then stuff like I'm just really not sold on it being comparable cross-platform yet.
No, I agree completely. Like everyone's, and that's why in our performance preview, I was like, just focus on this comparing the iPhones to one another, because I saw a lot of people comparing back to like Power Mac G5s and doing like
stuff like that.
Yeah,
I don't know what that's about.
And you and I
fails to parse.
Yeah, you and I saw this.
Tight mismatch.
You and I saw this when we tried comparing Android to iOS data. Some of the Android stuff doesn't add up at all, right? Like if you look at Geekbench under Android and compare two platforms that should be performing a certain way, it's not comparable data. Like that's why we don't use Geekbench in the Android space.
Yeah. And the dev, I mean, he emailed us. I feel like he's working on making that better.
Yes.
But I'm just not really sold that one is native versus one is running on Dalvik.
Yeah.
I feel like that might be the issue. I haven't spent enough time looking at it, but yeah, ever since I saw, we saw those numbers when it first came out for Android, I've just had this like bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah, no, I would strongly caution anyone against like drawing conclusions based on how much better this is or worse this is than Exynos Quad or Crate or anything like that. I don't think we have sufficient data to do a good cross-platform comparison here.
Yeah. So have you had time to actually use the phone? Have you played around with it?
Yes.
I mean, you're always getting calls, right? So how are you battery life testing?
Yeah, so I basically I had to add another line, and then I had to proactively call everyone from. I've got like a Sprint phone that the Motorola Photon Q. So I've been calling everyone and confusing them with that number, and basically saying, "Hey, if you need me, call me over here." So yeah, but basically I got the phone at 11 something a.m. on Friday when I was still in New York, and I used it for that whole day. So I got to experience the awesome noise canceling earpiece thing, which was great.
I still saw nobody mentioned that in their review, and it was very disappointing for me when I saw all the reviews came out. Nobody mentions that sound or that feel.
Yeah. So now here's the thing. I asked a friend, Manny. I asked him. I was like, "Hey, did you notice the earpiece thing?" And he doesn't call enough using the earpiece, not using a headset, to really notice it. So he said he did a couple calls and couldn't notice it. Whereas for me, immediately, like the first two calls I was on, I was in New York City, so there was a lot of noise to cancel out. It was like immediately apparent. The issue I have with it is it doesn't seem to be consistent. Like I've had it happen once or twice during maybe a 2-minute call. I had it happen for a total of like maybe 12-13 seconds, and then it just stopped noise canceling for whatever reason.
It seems to kick in, yeah, like you're saying, it kicks. There's a threshold,
but it's a super neat effect, right? Like I think it's I don't necessarily know that it's something that I have to have yet, right? Because it's so inconsistent in how it kicks in, but it's really cool. Like I like that it's there.
It is very cool. Yeah, I don't know. It's just it was something new for me.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, the other stuff, like it's 16:9. Okay. It is a lot faster.
Yes.
I'll give it, granted that it's like very fluid everywhere.
Yes.
Like the hardware is phenomenal. I feel like iOS 6 as a whole is a regression. Maybe we should talk about maps and YouTube and all that situation.
See, I don't feel like it's a regression. I feel like maps is...
No, I feel like it's a regression. Like there were features removed this release. Compared to iOS 5...
You feel like the OS as a whole was a regression? Or just because of the maps and YouTube thing?
Just because of maps and YouTube. Like this release should have been iOS 5.5 or something.
Yeah. So
a point update, but because it's a yearly cadence, we need to increase the number by one.
Yes. Well, I mean, it has to play catch up to OS 10, right?
Yeah. So that they both become 10.
Exactly.
Pretty soon.
I mean, I
So
bet
what,
you
they've
in
only got 4 years left.
yep, in 4 years, I bet they just unify the whole thing, and then they either all move to ARM or all move to Intel.
Wow, that's scary. That's an interesting prediction. I kind of like that.
Right? Like it's we talked about this a little bit last week, right? Like it's if mainstream client computing goes to 10 watts and ARM is competing in this 1 to 2 watt space, that's not a lot of gap for them to make up. Now, I'm not saying that means that they can deliver a great 10-watt part, but it's a lot more believable than ARM coming out with like a 100-watt, beefy, completely separate design CPU.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I mean, no, you're totally right. Like, there's nothing I can add to that. Like, it seems so obvious when you say it, but at the same time, I think a lot of people haven't put all that together yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, there's a lot that can happen between now and then. But I guess anyone looking to, and I've seen you comment on this as well. Everyone giving Tim Cook the pat on the back or whatever. It's totally premature, right? If you want to see whether or not he can fill Steve's shoes, let's see how he manages this transition. Right? Because
I
that's
had another thought too. The hardware product lines themselves are very hard to screw up because of that, very long tail design process. Like what does that look like? Well, it's not something that you can just churn on a dime. But the software side, that got me thinking, like, is this exodus away from Google just sort of like we're following the 2 points that Steve set off into oblivion, or this is a man that frequently would change his mind instantly, which is something that it takes a lot of guts to do, and say, hey, maybe we really shouldn't be reinventing maps here. Maybe we should extend the olive branch or the checkbook or whatever, and pay for the API, right? I mean, Ian, you're in the UK. You've seen how messed up the maps are in the UK. I don't think you're not an iOS user or anything, but that's what I was trying to communicate in my sections of that iOS 6 maps review when I said, outside the US and outside California, it like it falls off fast, right? Like I've told people, unless you're on the West Coast, basically your maps coverage is abysmal. Like you have no 3D anything. I don't know. This is me.
So for me, I used maps quite a bit in New York, and it wasn't terrible, but I felt like one, obviously the lack of
That's a flagship market, though. I mean, come on, it's got 3D stuff now.
well, no, I was more conservative. So the lack of public transit mapping was an issue for me, and because like I want to go places on the subway, and it would be helpful to have a mapping system that could do that.
Yeah.
So
Well, luckily you had the Razr M, right?
yes, I had the Razr M. I also had the One X. Like I had other things, but it's just I was there. A friend of mine was there with me, and we'd be like, okay, let's go here for dinner, and then I'd say, oh crap, you have to. Can you look this up on your phone? Like I can't actually map the subway route there. So he just made fun of me a lot the whole time. And then there were other things that I noticed where I would try to. I remember I was in Times Square, and then I was just trying to go a couple blocks over. I was just trying to figure out where that was, and so I wanted to use the new navigation, turn-by-turn navigation stuff, and it basically told me to walk 60 feet and then just magically teleport to my destination. Like it just stopped, and so that was kind of frustrating. And again, having a friend who was using a 1X right next to me, there was just lots of fun being poked in my direction. But
in that regard, I just can't help feel that it's a regression. Like, what is the feature add beyond 3D? Like, I get that, this is a strategic move. There's that constant drive to vertical integration. There are regulatory things involved with the fact that you can't use the Google Maps tiles to do turn by turn, and also now you have to pay a lot of money to get Maps API access, over 1,000 requests per month or something.
Yeah.
So like,
Wait,
I
so
understand
why
all
is
this, but at the same time, we're talking about, like these are problems for lawyers and businessmen to work out.
Yeah.
Like, this is not an engineering based problem.
So,
Right?
question.
This is why I'm like, just show up with the checkbook, and then really the problem goes away.
So, question: what is the regulatory? And I want to get Ian's take on all of this, iPhone 5 as well as iOS 6 Maps, as he's the resident non-USer here.
In the UK, the maps is terrible. Like, honestly, they have. I guess there are some regions that have things labeled both in English and Welsh, and then there are just cities that are misnamed, and there's apparently some. I mean, there's just like everything is wrong there for some reason. So it's hilarious. You see all this stuff popping up.
I've
Ian-
heard of towns being in the wrong place.
Yeah, exactly.
But the thing for maps for me, I'll give you a usage scenario which I use. So go out for the night to a club, not completely tanked, but at 1 a.m. try and look for a way home. So I live 15, 20 miles outside the direct centre of London. So I want to be able to use the public transport to get home. I want to find which night buses I need to connect to, and when they're going to arrive and how often they arrive. With my Android phone, it was no problem. I was home within an hour and a half, and there were plenty of buses. Given what I've heard about the iPhone 5 and iOS 6 and Maps, I just couldn't put my faith in that sort of system if it won't allow me to do that.
Yeah, and that's coming with the addition of third-party plugins that will expose routing. But yeah, as it launched, that doesn't exist. Like, I guess you'd have to hail a cab, but how much does that run?
It's like 20,000 pounds.
Yeah, I've got a feeling that would be sort of like £50 plus.
Yeah, so like basically as much as you spent on drinks, maybe.
Oh no! I don't spend that much on drinks. I'm not much of a
Okay.
drinker.
I don't know how much drinks cost in London.
That would easily triple a night out if I had to call a taxi. As it is, I could just use my Oyster card, use my Android phone, get night buses home, easy.
Yeah, so I don't know. That's why I say, in some regards, it feels like a regression.
So the maps thing, it's frustrating for sure, right? Like it is a pretty significant undertaking in my eyes, right? Like to even contemplate going up against Google in this regard.
Well, and that's why I have to wonder: is that a strategic move that makes sense? Because big data is not Apple's bread and butter.
Yes.
Apple's bread and butter is industrial design, executing on products, and delivering, like this consistent user experience across everything.
Yeah.
That works, most of the time really well out of the box if you stay in the little ecosystem. Whereas Google's bread and butter is not really search. Search is what gets them revenue. Google's bread and butter is big data. They just love huge amounts of data that they can data mine, go find trends, merge. Like, so this like GIS fusion thing is they've nailed it. And there's just so much data backing that, both from handsets that are reporting all this back, so the optimal routes.
Yeah.
And then obviously the things like the Street View cars that are gathering all that data. And then they have their own satellites for doing, the aerial photography capture. Whereas, when you look at the players that Apple has kind of put together, it's just like, we're going to fuse all this stuff together, and most of them aren't, the highest tier. And the result is you get, aerial photography in some regions has clouds covering it. So, like when you're taking pictures, you need to take multiple pictures and then remove the clouds, do a color match, and then you get something that looks like what you would expect. And then in a lot of regions that hasn't been done. Like when I was looking around in a lot of regions in China, I just saw clouds. So that's when it's just like B and C players.
Yeah.
And just the data sources are not what they should be.
So I'm curious, normally I would agree with you here, right? That this is not Apple's, this is a Tim Cook famous saying, right? We're the most focused company that I know. But we just talked about this, right? Apple is now a CPU design house, right? Like they've already taken that step to, hey, we're going to expand far beyond just being known for industrial design or whatever. I feel like with this generation, with what they've done in the A6 and what they did with Maps, they've expanded the meaning of vertically integrated. and not by a small amount either, right? Like not just saying, hey, we're gonna integrate one or two more pieces of the stack, but these are like two major components of what makes a smartphone.
Well, the CPU execution has been great so far. I mean, we haven't uncovered any errata.
Yeah,
but
which still worries me like to no end that just something horrible is going to happen in 12 months. I have no basis for this,
why
but
12 months? Like it'll be hidden.
Well, I mean that's
It
just
won't really surface.
that's how it always works, right? It's maybe not 12 months, but maybe 6 months, right? I look at old major errata that we've seen, or a lot of major errata over time, and it always seems to surface either at launch or a handful of months after launch. Because the way it works is simulation doesn't stop once you've completed your design, right? So, let's say they completed their design a year ago, and you go through all the simulation, all the instruction combinations, and they fix bugs and they do new spins of silicon, and eventually they hit a point where they're like, look, we can ship this hardware, this is good. But even after that point, they're testing, because they're like just an impossible number of combinations of instructions and usage models and all the stuff that you have to simulate. And the higher performance and the bigger the chip, the more obviously simulation work you have to put into it. So even after they've committed to the design, they keep simulating. Which is why, if you remember the TLB bug on Phenom, we didn't get wind of that until like a week before launch, or maybe a couple weeks before launch, right? So they were simulating something, and then they hit this magical instruction combination, and they're like, oh crap, we're shipping silicon, OEMs have it now. Whoops, this is going to be a problem, right? Like it's so that always, or if you look at the what is it, the 1.13 gigahertz Pentium 3, where Intel announced it, Intel launched it, and then a month later they had to recall it, right? Because they're like, oh, whoops, by the way, this may not always work at its advertised frequency.
Yeah.
Like it's.
Well, I mean, the thing here is that Apple controls the OS, and probably they're hoping they can mitigate any errata just because they control all of that.
That's true. If they see a funky software or instruction combination, they can just kind of forbid it from happening at the OS level.
Exactly. Yeah. Or if it's a frequency thing, they just change their DVFS table.
Yeah.
So I feel like they think that they can mitigate all these things.
That's true. Yeah, that's a very good point. We've never had a CPU company. I mean, they can always push out new microcode, right? But that always required, well, you have to get everyone to update their BIOSes, which never happens. But here you can kind of force an update on everyone, right? Everyone's always on, always connected.
Yeah, and it's a phone and it has this OTA structure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Who knows whether they can execute?
No, I think that is a really, really good observation, right? Like that kind of even lends credibility to this idea that, look, Intel really needs to adopt these always on, always connected. Like the PC has to go there because it fixes a lot of issues, right? From their perspective, the ability to kind of guarantee that everyone who has this device is pretty much connected and has a system for, where you can deliver these sort of updates and get them working and in there quickly versus, well, you got to make sure you know a guy down the street that knows how to do a BIOS update for you, right? Like if you're a general consumer.
Well, excuse me. So what about the fact that Intel did try to do some of that with MeeGo? I mean, they wanted to have their own OS, right? Like
yeah.
They almost did, and they would have been at the same sort of, we control the OS, we control the CPU, we know how to best integrate all of this together.
That's true. I mean, I wish MeeGo went somewhere. I think they picked a great partner. I think they were blindsided by the Nokia Microsoft deal. And I think, like most aspects of Intel's push into phones, they were not aggressive enough.
You mean on the phone space?
Yeah. So I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, so there's that. Anything else that we want to talk about on iOS 6?
Well, there's the removal of YouTube too, but I mean that's not as big of a deal because Google made an app.
Yeah.
And YouTube is still there.
Yes.
And other than the fact that it doesn't work with AirPlay because of question mark, which will get fixed, then really YouTube didn't change at all. But there's no mitigation for Google Maps being gone unless you just go to it in the browser at this point.
Yeah, I think Maps was obviously the major departure there. The other thing that I'm wondering is how far away are we from Apple shipping a Maps application for OS 10?
Well, and yeah, you need to have a Maps application that exists on the web if you want to deliver the full thing.
Yeah. No, that's true.
Like, it's shocking to me that that didn't launch with the whole suite.
I feel like. Sorry, go ahead.
If they released the web application sort of like Google did first, then they would be able to iron out all these bugs before it came onto the iPhone 5.
And it's easier to submit trouble things on that than it is on the phone. Like, I've been submitting trouble things. Like, when I went up to the Sentinel Peak to take the panorama comparison shots, I used, turn by turn on iOS. And the last part, I recommended going the wrong way on a one-way road. So that's just like their data source didn't have that marked as one way. So I submitted that, but it's a pain. Like, it's not easy to submit those type of requests on the phone.
Yeah.
Who does the driving directions for the Apple Maps? Is it TomTom?
Some of the street data is TomToms. I mean, there's a bunch. I published the webpage. You can go look. And then, of course, your own code does the pathfinding and routing. So that's sort of like left as something for the reader, an exercise for the reader, or in this case, Apple to implement. But I mean, obviously, even the best routing, software won't get around the fact that sometimes you need to have, your maps data appropriately labeled for this is one way. So just stuff like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I do wonder what the long-term play here is, right? Like if I mean, obviously Apple's a huge company, right? They have to have a roadmap for this. And making this kind of a decision doesn't come without some sort of commitment to that roadmap. So the question is, where did Apple fall on the spectrum, right? Is it, hey, we shipped this and we didn't think it would be that bad? Or is it, yes, we know it is where it is, but we have confidence and a lot of money and we know we're going to fix it. And we have a roadmap internally that we're just not sharing at this point to get there.
See, but that's totally against the previous Apple MO. Like, the previous one would be, we just won't ship it until it's ready.
Yeah.
Or I guess in this circumstance, because of the API changes and Google wanting money, and they kept changing what the API rules are, and that license supposedly is up. And maybe their hands were forced, and and I read other interesting theories too, which are, well, maybe the Maps team wanted this integrated, so they pushed it out the door, and that forces everybody's hand to include it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can just guess either way, but I mean, your normal user doesn't really care. It's just like, it doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, I think the good thing is it leaves a lot of opportunity for other players in the market who, perhaps couldn't gain access to this hardcore iOS user to actually tempt them over, right? Which is good. It provides competition. It provides a reason for people to consider other platforms.
Absolutely, yeah.
The one common trend I encountered when I was in New York is every non-tech related establishment I went to, like during downtime there, I'd go visit a friend or, go to a restaurant or go anywhere I went. And when people asked me what I was doing, all they cared about was the iPhone part of it all, right? Like, and this happened actually 2 weeks prior when I was in New York. Everyone asked me why I was there, and I told them, Google, Motorola announced new phones, Nokia announced new phones, and everyone there, they just responded the same way. They're like, "Oh, it's not the iPhone. I don't really care."
That's so bad. See, my friends used to be that way too, but now they know that the majority of my work is Android.
Yeah, but so
there's less of like, it's like nobody has cared. Like, I've been in public with the iPhone 5, and nobody's been like, "Oh, is that the new iPhone yet?"
Yeah. No, it's this isn't just I didn't have a lot of my friends there. This is just normal people I'd run into in like businesses or whatever, and they would always say like it's just they just care about the iPhone. I mean, I was sitting in Central Park like working on the iPhone 5 performance piece, right? Like I just got the phone, walked the couple hundred feet to Central Park, and I'm working on it, and some like Russian ladies walk by and they're like, "Is that the new iPhone 5?" And they just start asking me questions about it. Like it's I think there's this whole focus in a lot of these communities that's just very, look, if it's Apple, I'm interested. Otherwise, it doesn't have anything to offer me. So I think this, the kind of teething issues or the growing pains with Apple's own Maps app leaves the opportunity for Samsung and some of these other guys to at least start having conversations with those owners, which I think is healthy.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think it's very healthy. So actually, I wanted to switch gears here a bit. Talking about Android. Ian, you were just at the Motorola Intel launch for the Razr I.
Yes.
How was that? Was this your first smartphone launch?
This was, and not being too clued up on smartphones, a little bit of it was confusing. Must be said. But it was a very sort of high-level launch. They weren't going into very much detail about what was inside the phone, just how it looked and how and they kept pulling numbers out of the air about battery life compared to the iPhone 4S and the iPhone 5.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. That's just how all smartphone launches seem to work, unfortunately.
And I was playing around with the Razr I afterwards, and one of the engineers said, "How do you like it?" And I said, "It's got two problems." And they said, "What are they?" And I went, "The iPhone 5 and the SGS 3."
Interesting.
That's pretty bold. That's pretty bold. I like that.
So I'm guessing we're never getting invited to another Motorola London event after that.
Oh no! I did say it in good humor, but
no, I mean that is a good point. Like it's so the Razr I is just a repurposed Droid Razr M, but with the Intel Medfield platform inside versus the Snapdragon S4 based the one we have here on Verizon.
Yeah, because you guys don't have LTE yet. Well, you sort of do, but it's not fully ready yet.
No, we don't. We should be getting it with Everything Everywhere,
Yes.
which is the high-level company over two of the UK carriers. So we're going to have 3 different, out of those 2 carriers, I can't remember which ones they are at the minute, but they're going to have shops for each, and then they're going to have new Everything Everywhere shops. I believe
it's Orange and T-Mobile.
Yeah, so we're going to have Orange for the sort of value, because over here in England we have a thing called Orange Wednesdays, whereby if you have an Orange phone, you can get a 2-for-1 on cinema tickets on Wednesdays. So they're going to keep that with Orange. T-Mobile's going to be sort of the high end, and Everything Everywhere is meant to be the ultimate enthusiast. But Everything Everywhere is going to have LTE soon, and then everybody else is going to come up with it sometime next year.
Well, wait, you guys get 2-for-1 movie tickets just for subscribing to like your wireless provider?
Yeah, what the heck is this?
Is this news?
No fair.
Yeah.
So if you have a SIM program with Orange, you can text a certain number. They'll send you back a code, and then at least Odeon cinemas, I definitely know that you can get 2-for-1 cinema tickets on a Wednesday evening. But obviously, it's very popular on a Wednesday because of this deal.
Yeah, but I don't care. That's awesome. Like we don't, and this chain of theaters, like they play movies that people want to see. It's not like, oh, we're just airing cartoons from the 70s.
Yeah, no, I think it's every film.
Wow, dude, AT&T, like I want something, man. Like this is.
Yeah, I'm lucky if AT&T doesn't even take me to dinner first. Like it's just there's nothing. I could go on this tangent forever.
Like it's just, I finally switched over to like the new family share data plan here.
Oh, you gave in?
Yeah.
Why'd you give in?
I don't know. I wanted the $10 a month that I would get out of it, I guess.
You can FaceTime over cellular now, I guess.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Did you like how in my review of iOS 6, I was like, I didn't test this because I refused to switch plans.
Well, so
and that was literally all there was to say about the feature.
Yeah, no, I saw that. Well, so the thing is, I gave up unlimited a while ago, right? Because I wanted to get legit tethering. So the move,
that makes sense.
The move from that to the family data share, but like I save $10 a month, and kind of not really. Like it's not the savings aren't huge, despite the fact that the whole point of this is to save a lot of money. But then apparently Ian just gets awesome every Wednesday. They take him to a movie. Like that's awesome.
It's I just phone up my grandmother who has an Orange plan and ask her for a code.
Wow,
Wow.
that's good. That is so.
See,
What
it's
did?
like I would never know that exists.
Yeah,
Ever.
it's like AT&T does such a good job of making sure that we're not friends with, I guess, threats on Facebook, right? That we don't get this information. So what else do they do? If you get 2-for-1 movie tickets on Wednesdays, what do the other cell phone providers offer you?
I believe T-Mobile is doing what's called a full Monty, which is texts, minutes, data, everything unlimited for £33 a month if you take out a 24-month contract with a high-end phone.
Wow.
Oh yeah, we've heard about that though. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I'm more interested in the free movie tickets or dinner, just because it feels like that's something like your friend does for you, right? And I would love to be able to think of my carrier partner as a friend versus just the person who's like constantly screwing me. Like it's just,
I wouldn't mind if AT&T bought me like a big gulp,
yeah,
like Big Gulp Tuesdays or something, or like
yeah. I mean
that would make it a
something,
lot better.
right? Like just improve my day throughout the week versus because otherwise the only other time I have to interact with AT&T is when they're taking something away from me or making me pay them more money for something that I already have.
Or snarky blog posts.
Yes, or
I
snarky
love
blog.
the snarky blog posts.
No, it was like so when I'm adding my other line, right? I went in went into the store and I didn't have my Nano SIM to micro SIM adapter yet. So I was like, look, just I need another line and give me a micro SIM. And they say, yeah, that's fine. So they do that. I get home, and of course, my Nano SIM adapter is like in my mailbox. So I'm like, oh crap, I have to go back to AT&T. I think this should be a very simple thing to do. No, what results is like a 4-hour long, half in the store, half on the phone process that never fully got resolved, and it ended up being
Wow, really?
or resulting in I guess one of my Sims getting canceled in the middle of the night. It was just a pain.
I'm really jealous. I didn't get my Nano SIM, the micro SIM to full size SIM adapters got sent back to the sender because USPS decided I was no longer living here.
Oh, when you were like gone in Korea or whatever?
It was when I was gone to HTC, and then there was something else before that, wasn't there?
Yeah.
So like all together, somehow that ended up being like 2 weeks, and then I didn't check my mail for like the 12 hours I was back or whatever, and then they were like, "Oh, well, because the carrier saw your mail piling up, we just assumed that you were vacant, so everything was returned to sender."
Wow, that's a pretty big assumption.
Yeah, but apparently they're allowed to make that assumption, so I had to go through the process of like, I live here, please give me mail, and then like just hope that nothing important was in there. But I'm sure that my adapters were.
You're enjoying Gangnam Style too much.
Yes, I was.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's talk about that. You're in Korea. You got to play with the LG Optimus G.
Yeah, so LG flew us out, and now we can talk about what I was there for, I guess.
Yes.
And that was the LG Optimus G, which is their latest and greatest device. And of course, it includes the APQ 8064, so that's quad core crate at 1.5 gigahertz with Adreno 320 graphics.
Which Adreno 320 did really well versus the iPhone 5 and GL benchmark.
Right? Yeah, it's like it's really far up there.
Yeah.
It's just like rivaling it. So, I mean, yeah, Adreno 320 is a pretty competent beast so far. But of course, because it's an APQ part, it also needed to have a discrete modem, discrete baseband. So in this case, it's MDM 9615. So this is the sort of Fusion 3 SoC and baseband combination that Qualcomm has been pimping. So we've seen Fusion 1 and Fusion 2. This is Fusion 3. And so, yeah, they flew us out to go play with it. It has, what is it? It's like 1280 by 768 display, so it's a little bit wider than 720p. And the construction is great. It's like, it's a solid piece of plastic, but it has metal, it has glass on the front and back. And it's very, very well built. And I don't know. So when I got to Korea, they gave me an LG Optimus LTE 2, which is an 8960 phone. That's the current latest and greatest. And then that was provisioned on U+. And then when they gave us the Optimus G to play around with, these were hand assembled units because they haven't entered mass production yet. then we took our SIMs out and put them in that phone and used it for the remainder of the trip. But yeah, it's a great device. 13 megapixel camera, although the pixels are only 1.1 microns. So yeah, and there's an 8 megapixel version that doesn't have a bump on the back, so the camera module is flush. But yeah, it's a very, very potent device, and it's going to be coming to the US soon, and they're going to have a lot of traction, and we're going to see it a lot more too. So yeah, that's sort of the long and short of the LG Optimus G.
So you got to, while you were there, I kept seeing really cool photos from South Korea from you. Were those taken on the Optimus G, or was that on?
Yeah, the ones that I tweeted were all taken on the G.
That's awesome. And are you allowed to discuss where you were when you tweeted those photos?
You mean the DMZ?
Yes.
Yeah, that's okay to discuss. So I mean, on the last day they took us to so they let us do some sightseeing, and they brought us to, like, there's these 3 stops that everybody kind of makes on the DMZ, and one is sort of like this kind of interesting / a little bit unnerving amusement park thing. It's like amusement park / memorial / this is where your DMZ tour begins area.
Wow.
And that's where you sort of transition from like a civilian car to like a bus that's sort of militarized and, allowed to go closer to North Korea and through these checkpoints. And so we took some pictures there. I mean, you could see the DMZ. You could see like some armed guards. There's a bridge where, prisoners of war came across. It's not the bridge of no return. That's somewhere else. So we saw that. Then we went to an overlook, and the overlook was great because you could see into North Korea, and you could see the 3rd largest flagpole in the world. And there's this yellow line you're not supposed to take pictures in front of, and so everybody sort of like does their thing, taking pictures behind this line. And there are all these like binocular things, and there's like the last LTE base station with all the antennas pointed towards South Korea. And lots of tourists, it was very touristy, but it's cool to look down there, and that town, it was very interesting to look into because, you could see that there was not a lot going on. There were no like cars moving or anything. So you're kind of wondering, like, is this for show? And they have these huge flags sort of like waving, that it's all propaganda stuff. So then they took us to the 3rd incursion tunnel, which is all these tunnels that they've dug from North Korea into South Korea for invasion. And this one had been discovered by a defector telling them where it was roughly, and them digging lots of holes. So we got to go down there and walk around. And yeah, it was quite fascinating, the sightseeing things. Just like I've always wanted to go to the DMZ, so you can check that one off, which was awesome.
That's great. And actually, Christian, he's in South Korea right now for Samsung's SSD 840 Pro Tech Day /launch.
Yeah, so I missed him by 1 week.
Yes. Yeah, no, he just got there a couple days ago.
What was interesting to me, Brian, is how you were tweeting about how good the LTE coverage was in Korea.
Oh my gosh, it's phenomenal. The whole time I was thinking about how just it was amazing. Like literally, and amazing in a way that like the speeds were okay because it's only 10 megahertz on U+. So, but the coverage was just unbelievable. Like it never stopped.
That's awesome.
Like I never dropped a bar anywhere. Like, the only place that I lost signal was in the incursion tunnel. Yeah, so that's like, I mean, you see these base stations everywhere, and it's just incredible because I think in the US people need to demand so much more from the carriers. Like ultimately that's what it comes down to, is that, we need to expect more and demand more.
Yeah.
And not be satisfied with what we have because, like I'm used to going into an elevator and just everything goes away.
Yeah.
I stepped into elevators everywhere in South Korea and it never once went away.
Wow. How are they doing that? Like just a lot of localized coverage in the buildings?
Yeah, lots of very small cells. I mean, I took lots of pictures, tons of very small power, low power small cells everywhere.
So what's your recommendation then? How does, other than demanding my free movie ticket every week, what do we do to kind of, expect and demand more from our carriers?
I really wish I knew. Honestly, I don't know. Just people need to be vocal and complain, and um, squeaky wheel gets the grease type thing. The
Yeah.
other thing is that in the U.S., everybody's always like, "Oh, these cell towers are ugly," or we don't want them on this building. And like in San Francisco, apparently this is a big thing because everybody's like, "Oh, it looks ugly. We don't want them." But at the same time, everybody's willing to complain about how bad things are. So you can't have it both ways. Like I saw lots of antennas that weren't disguised or weren't masked or anything, and that's how you get good coverage,
Interesting.
right? So if you wanna be complaining, like, oh, it looks ugly, I don't like seeing them, I'm gonna get cancer or whatever, then you're gonna get this is what you reap. Right?
But people used to complain about power pylons being, destroying the view of the countryside, and now they're everywhere. So
Brian,
Yeah,
I want my good coverage.
Me too.
I
Me
feel
too,
like
so
Brian, I feel like you should editorialize this, right? Like if no, I mean, you said it yourself, right? Like there's no one, when I ask you how do we fix this, be the squeaky wheel, right? At least offer a platform that can get shared around, and people can start linking to it and talking about it at least.
No, I know you're right. Yeah, I think it needs to happen. There's a lot, and you only really start to appreciate this when you venture outside the U.S.
Yes.
And just going there, it was so evident that this is completely different. I mean, and of course, that culture has just already a huge demand on internet connectivity. Like in the hotel room, I had 100 megabits up and down, just out. So basically, I was limited only by like 100 base TX.
Yeah, which is just mind blowing because I go and I think about what I expect from hotel rooms here, and it's like just give me like 5 megabit, right? Like that's if you can
Most of the time I barely get one.
Yeah, if you can give me 5,
it-
I'm okay. And that's like, if you're staying at a nice hotel, right? And it ends up being that like a lot of the cheaper places are the ones that actually have decent internet.
You still got to pay $15 a day for it, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
So see, most of the hotels I've ever stayed at in England, it's included in the price, or hotels in Taiwan, So whenever I go stay in the US, it always confounds me that I have to, lay down $10, $15 a day for internet.
It depends entirely on the chain. I feel like the more affordable chains included in the price because they have to differentiate, right, at those price points. And then the more expensive the hotel, the more they're like, oh, just give us $20 a day and then we'll give you internet.
Yeah, and most of the time it's still not even fast. Like
No.
this, I'm pretty sure was free, and it was just 100 megabits straight up.
Oh,
And there was no captive portal or anything. Like you just plugged in and it worked.
that's awesome. So that actually reminds me of something else that I actually talked to you about. I was using the Razr M when I was in New York, and that's when I discovered that it supports 5 gigahertz tethering, which I thought was really cool.
That is very cool. Yeah.
Like it went from not being able to. I mean, I was staying in Times Square, so obviously, like doing anything at 2.4 gigahertz is just impossible. So I went from not being able to like get an internet connection, or barely being able to conduct transactions of data, to I just manually specified channel 153 or 157, and then boom, it was perfect. Like even in the middle of Times Square, I could still tether, and it worked. And it's weird, like there's no like toggle for it. The only way is you have to go into the mobile hotspot settings and manually specify one of those 5 gigahertz channels, and then it works. Otherwise, it's it defaults to 2.4 gigahertz.
I think that's very interesting that they have that feature exposed, and I was skeptical, so I looked at the FCC docs, and yeah, it's there, which is incredible.
Yeah, like
I think that might be the first.
Well, so that's what I'm wondering, like how many other phones? Because I never think to look there, right? Like I just assume that if it supported 5 gigahertz, they would expose it.
I'd assume the Razr I did as well, then, in that respect.
It's possible. I don't know what Wi-Fi stack they use there.
Razer Eyes is a TI Y-Link, I believe.
Oh yeah, that's right.
That's part of the Medfield platform.
That's right. I don't know. So that was a cool feature.
I haven't seen. I mean, I always check because I always do the hotspot tethering test. And I haven't seen that feature on any phone. So that's the first that I've heard of it, which is awesome.
So even on like the old Droid Razr or Razr Max?
Yeah, exactly. There's no 5 gigahertz AP there.
Yeah, no, it's like I didn't believe it at first, and I checked. My laptop negotiated at 5 gigahertz. I tried to connect it from the iPhone 4S. It wouldn't work because the 4S obviously doesn't support 5 gigahertz, but the 5 does, so it would connect to it. I don't know. It was just really interesting. It was totally unexpected.
Yeah, that caught me by surprise. At first, I was like, "Wow, something must be wrong," because
Exactly.
this is, like, I mean, we've done a little, like we had a reader email and talk and mentioned that it was probably DFS, which makes sense. It makes sense in retrospect, and so clearly this one hasn't implemented. Although, did they only expose certain channels? Like, was it only the higher channels?
Yes,
Was it only?
it was 153, 157, and a couple others.
Okay, well, those are the non-DFS channels. So there you go.
Can you explain that to everyone listening? I don't know that everyone knows what you're talking about.
That on 5 gigahertz, you're sharing spectrum with what ends up being radar a lot of times. Like, I believe it's also the terminal Doppler weather radar, the TWDRs. There's a couple other too. But so because you're sharing some of those channels with that's spectrum that's used for that, the access point needs to be able to detect the pulses from those radar systems and then dynamically change what frequency the channel is on. So that's where you get DFS, dynamic frequency selection. And what it will do is just avoid those channels whenever it sees a radar or some other transmitter fire up. And so not all the channels on 5 gigahertz are regulated that way, and it's sort of a market by market thing. But in the US, I believe it's like 149 and above are all non-DFS, and then there are a couple below. I always have to check because it's not really worth memorizing unless you're doing this every day.
Yeah.
But the non-DFS channels also give you they also have a higher power, maximum power. So that's why I'm always telling people when they're setting up their 5 gigahertz APs at their house, like go for 149 or above, because the access point will let you go at higher power most of the time, even if it's not saying so. And also, you don't have to worry about DFS or anything. So obviously, in a mobile phone, you'd need to implement all of that checking, and that's just kind of a headache. So I guess the mitigation is just implement the channels that aren't affected by DFS, and you're good to go.
Yeah. No, it's super useful. Like it actually made wireless hotspot actually functional and usable there, which I thought was cool.
Literally, you can't do. I mean, can I also just say thank you, whoever decided to put 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi in the iPhone, like 4334, like we predicted. Thank you. Like, this is just like that's the biggest thing ever for me.
No, I agree.
I should include that as a number 4 for me in the big update feature things.
No, I agree completely. But that's the thing we were complaining about last time, that even though you get 5 years Wi-Fi, you don't get 5 years tethering. Which of all the companies I would expect to do it, I would have expected Apple to kind of jump on that first.
But Apple wants you to do tethered. Like they really want you to do tethered.
Like physically tethered?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I guess I should have with the lightning cable.
Yes.
The $20 lightning cable.
Well, can I say
has some active stuff in it?
Can I say that I do like that connector? Right? Like I wish micro USB was that physical type of connector. Plug in any direction you want, and it just kind of works.
I wish USB was like that.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Although I never plug USB in wrong, because I see this on Reddit. Like everybody is constantly posting who designed USB. I'm always plugging it in upside down. It's very simple. The USB indicator is always on the top most of the time. Like it's like 85, 90%.
But then you have to know what side top is on your device. That's not always.
Well, I know what side top is on the device, or at least on the fat port. Yeah, it's obvious.
I mean, on my computer or anything. Going to a friend's
it's
computer,
facing
stick
up
in.
on the motherboard. Like take the Surface Normal coming out where you would plug a CPU, and that's up. So then you want to align the USB in. Like, this sounds dumb, but for me, it's never a problem. Like, I read these things and I'm like, really? You people haven't noticed that the logo is always on one side?
No, honestly,
no, I've noticed, but it still takes me 3 times to put in a USB port.
Yeah, so to be honest, I never even noticed that correlation, right? I just assumed that this is how it works. You just have to fail a bunch of times before you get it right. It's like branch prediction for me, right? Like it's just how it is. I accepted it, but as
You have
usual,
to like feel out which way is right.
yeah, dude, I plug in
That's
every
it.
cable upside down. Thunderbolt, USB, SATA, everything goes in the wrong way at least once.
So
Really?
SATA I always check, but USB for some reason I don't check. I just go, no, no. Okay, that goes in.
No, just keeps going. Well, it's because when you're hesitant plugging it in the first time, even if you got it aligned correctly, you're not going to push it in because you're worried about breaking it. So that's why you get like the 3 plugs.
Let's just have a hammer beside it. In.
See, it's actually even worse. Like I remember way back when I had a motherboard or a system or something where like the USB port was physically broken when I received it. So I like tried to, stick it in, the right way, the wrong way, the right way, the wrong way, and I kept doing it, kept failing every single time, and eventually I had to look at the USB port, and I was like, oh, they just screwed it up. It's not me, and I think that's like psychologically ruined me for life.
Yeah, you've always been hesitant.
I always assume that now there's, it's just I'm getting it wrong, or the guy who built this thing in Taiwan like screwed it up before shipping it to me, right? Like I assume that that's one of the likely outcomes, even though it hasn't happened in 11 years.
Gotcha. Well, I think the cable is interesting in itself because it's adaptive in some way, and everybody that's saying it's only USB 2.0 is wrong, apparently. And there are going to be other cables. So I guess we'll see what happens. What irks me is that it's $20 for the USB 2.0 to Lightning cable.
Yes.
And that if you go to the store and you try to buy a power adapter, like previously the game was you could just buy the power adapter and cable for like $10 more, like $5 more or something. So obviously it made sense to buy that. But they haven't updated that at all. So you can just buy a power adapter with a useless 30-pin dock cable or a standalone power adapter then you pay $20 extra for the cable to go with it. And that to me just seems that's like pure profit. That's like buying a couple of those and I could have bought a whole new iPhone again on contract.
Sorry, what about wireless charging? Are we ever going to see that soon, or is that just because selling people new connectors for $30, $20 every time is going to make money?
We're never going to have wireless charging while you have a metal back. That's true. Thing. And at the same time, like if you want NFC, at present, there's no ability to have simultaneous coexistence of wireless charging and NFC because both are just like an inductive loop, right? So, but the new controllers will detect whether you're doing NFC or whether you're doing wireless charging, so you don't just send like tons of voltage across your NFC controller on accident. So that'll come eventually, but I'm just still not really. I mean, it seems like the wireless charging space is getting even more standards. Like Intel has one now, Qualcomm has one now, and then there's Key, which has been around the longest, and some of them are like closely coupled, and then some of them are loosely coupled, and then there's another one that I can't remember what the Intel one is, but some of them have different alignment requirements and how close you have to be. So that space is like so volatile right now that it's hard. Like I have a TI debug key forum board. Like if you like, I talked with one of the TI engineers for a long time about this, and he was like, "Well, why don't we just send you everything that you need to implement, like doing all your tests?" So I have it, but even then, I don't really use it too often to do actual charging, just because you need to buy the back and like a door.
Yeah.
All this stuff.
No, I mean, clearly, like when you have any situation where you have tons of competing standards, that's never good for actually fostering, adoption of a standard, because everyone's so worried about adopting the wrong one.
Exactly. Well, and Wi-Fi display finally got that right. Like now we have Miracast, and it's relatively solidified, and everybody's getting behind that.
Yep, and WiDi now supports it as well, so it'll just work.
See, and I really like that, and I think the OEMs recognize that if they want to compete with Apple, they need to do it with standardized approaches that sort of commoditize all these things that are otherwise, they exist for the Apple ecosystem, but they're not going to exist for like just HTC or just Samsung.
Yes,
like it's going to need to be much broader.
So what's interesting to me is, and I agree with all that. Obviously, like those are the learnings we had from the PC industry, right? That you have to have standards, and they have to be free or low cost enough where everyone implements them, and that's how you get, that's how you build like a nice base ecosystem for everyone to kind of play in. The interesting thing to me is the choice in naming for that connector.
Because of the whole cloud, lightning, thunderbolt thing?
Yeah, I mean, it seems, and I don't know if like this is just me reading way too much into it, but it seems like close enough to Thunderbolt. And if you look at, well, what happens if Apple chooses not to adopt an x86, like an Intel-based smartphone part, right, down the road, and they want to use Thunderbolt as kind of an interface technology. I don't know if this ends up being we'll just figure it out and we'll do it over our own little connector instead. If that ends up being like a plan B.
Interesting.
Right? Like I don't know. Otherwise I don't understand why you would name it so close, right? Like to.
Well, see, I thought it would be because maybe you could do USB 3.0 at some point in the future, even though this SoC doesn't support it.
Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, so the other option is, Intel has kind of, not publicly, but they've kind of mentioned that eventually Thunderbolt becomes an open standard. Once, they kind of get it right, then they'll open it up. Other people may be able to make controllers for it and stuff like that. So maybe that happens and this becomes a non-issue. But I don't know. I think it's just very curious naming.
Have you measured the NAND speed? So would USB 3.0 still wouldn't actually do anything, right?
I have not measured the NAND speeds. That's I thought about doing that when I was in New York, and then ever since I got back, it's just been nonstop battery life testing.
Yeah, we still have a lot of stuff. Like people were emailing and sending stuff to me, like, "Where's the iPhone 5 review?"
Yeah,
I'm like, wait, it's gonna be like at least a full week or something. Maybe like. There's no way it's gonna be like 2 days after I'm back from Korea. Like we have all this stuff to do.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working as much as I can on it. I honestly, had I not lost the past 2 days to like kind of battery life tests that we're honestly not going to publish, just for consistency, or it just becomes unfeasible to run these regularly. I think I would have been, at a point in the schedule where I could see me being done with everything I need to do before the end of the week. But I think realistically, probably, I'd agree with you, like the beginning of next week.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, obviously we'll shoot for more aggressive than that. It's just, there's a lot of stuff that has to be done. So to answer your question, I don't know. I'm assuming what they put on here is still, is it Samsung NAND from the teardown?
I think so.
So
don't quote me.
Yeah, so
I'm not sure.
I thought it was Samsung, and if they dual source, it'll be Samsung or Toshiba. I don't know. I remember seeing Elpida as well, but maybe that was just for the DRAM.
Yeah, that's right.
So if it's Samsung NAND, I'm assuming it's not the latest and greatest. I'm assuming they're still at 27 nanometer, which would be toggle 1.1, which is not fast enough to require beyond USB 2, I don't think, for a single.
So I loaded up the iFixit teardown. It looks like they have Hynix.
Hynix, interesting. Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Hynix is like really cost effective. I don't remember. I think Hynix might be Onfi. I need to look into it and see which Onfi spec they implement.
Yeah, this is your area of expertise.
Yeah, I mean it's so we last time what did we say? They were like in the 20 to 40 megabytes per second range, right? For NAND speed.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's physically possible to do faster I/O than that. Especially in some of these like multi-die configurations. The problem is I know nothing about what kind of controller they've implemented. Right? Like where everyone else falls short is they use like this really bad eMMC controller that just can't push data. Like it's just really bad. It's basically a USB stick or an SD card in a phone.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know. And this is what I've been talking to you about. Like I keep waiting for the day when Apple integrates all their Anabit stuff. Right? I think what they did with the A6 makes it very clear that at some point they're just going to build in an SSD controller. And that's why they bought Anabit, and it's just going to happen. And now that Samsung with the SSD 840 said that, hey, we're going to ship a mainstream consumer drive that uses 3-bit per cell MLC NAND, if they can do it, then that means that everyone else isn't that far away from being able to do something that's high performance and high endurance as well. So that'll be interesting. But honestly, I don't know. I haven't dug that much into the NAND side yet. I do want to. That's kind of next on the list. I need to find someone with a 32 gig model. I have access to a 16 and a 64.
Yeah, I have the 64.
Yeah, I
only bought one this time. I was like, I'm going for the max.
Yeah, I don't.
Oh, and I got it unlocked too, the shady unlock thingy.
So how did you confirm that worked?
I put in a T-Mobile SIM.
Okay, so you just
and I tweeted a picture of it working.
No, I saw that, but that's true. How did you? And you just like prison filed down the SIM?
That's right.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And well, that's why I'm like, I need my Nano SIM adapter because now I can't do anything with my T-Mobile line.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I need to do that. I need to get a T-Mobile SIM. How did you? So do you want to explain the shady unlock?
So there are a couple different sites that do this. The one that I used, I can't remember. It's like imzdl.com. So like, I'm not personally recommending them, but they've built, but it works. And they've built something of a reputation originally around doing this this UDID proxy registration thing so that you could run the betas even though you weren't a developer. And now they've gone into factory unlocking for AT&T locked iPhones. So basically the way this works is they register as an Apple reseller and then they submit the unlock token requests against Apple and they get them back. And as long as AT&T doesn't really find out, then it works. So
now if AT&T
$35.
If AT&T finds out, can they reverse the unlocking procedure?
No. This is like the way the Apple architecture works is that it's like permanent as soon as you get the token. And even better, it's permanent on your like if you go get it replaced, you get it replaced with an unlocked one, factory unlocked.
So how does that work? Does it now come up like when Apple, you go to the Genius, he looks at your phone and he's like, oh, this is unlocked. I'm going to give you an unlocked one?
Precisely.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, I've seen screenshots of the back end and it shows up as factory unlocked true. And so, yeah, that works. And yeah, I don't know what else there is to say about it.
No,
it's
that's
authorized unlock true. It works. It's kind of sketchy. Like it's obviously very shady. But I have no qualms about doing this.
Especially if we're not going to get our free movie ticket. Like I just...
Yeah, this is my free movie ticket, even though I paid $35.
Yeah. So I know Ian wanted to talk about Borderlands 2, which I kind of don't want him to talk about because I haven't played it yet, and I'm afraid like I have way too much work, but I want to hear his thoughts on it. So real quick, before we get to that, the last thing in the phone space, I was at the launch of HTC's Windows Phone 8X and 8S, and it'll still be a while before we get our hands on devices. But and Brian had kind of looked at them and used them prior to this announcement, and he was telling me about how good they feel and how well HTC did this round. And I have to agree, man. Like in-hand feel of the 8X and 8S, personally, I thought blew away. Handling the Lumia 920. I
see. That's what I thought too, but I couldn't really say anything until
it was public.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree with you. Like I didn't expect it. I was like, it's just going to be another Windows Phone, but I really liked the feel of these things. And I thought HTC did an awesome job with all the colors and the styling and all of it. Like HTC today is so different of a company than HTC like 15 months ago. It's just unbelievable how much they've changed. And the other cool thing is, Brian, what you were describing to me is the fact that they just completely redid the way the inside is assembled, right? So instead of being a stack of display, PCB, and then battery, it's kind of reversed. So you have display, battery, and then PCB at the very end. So you kind of have this like pyramid design at the back, which I never really got until I held it, and it's just really cool. I think they did a really good job with it.
And they maximize their battery volume that way, which is really, really quite novel.
Mm-hmm. No,
and of course, then your antennas aren't being blocked by a big battery, so Yeah, just like it seems obvious now, but it's an interesting approach.
It's really well done. I was very pleased with it. We still obviously Microsoft is still on its hey, you can't see or know anything about Windows Phone 8 or Windows 8 or whatever. So we weren't allowed to touch much beyond like the lock screen and a few like canned demos. But
Oh, so they let you pass the lock screen.
they let us pass the lock screen, but we weren't able to tap anything.
Okay.
For anything else, the demo person had to sit there and say, "Hey, this is me playing music," or "Here's a movie."
So the normal on rails thing.
Yeah, it's just Microsoft being Microsoft again, unfortunately. So, anyways, that's that. Ian, Borderlands 2, do you have it? Have you been playing it?
Yeah. So Borderlands 2. Wow. Go buy it. It's amazing. Seriously. So I used to be quite an avid gamer. I did clan gaming. I did the whole you get home from school, don't do your homework, play on your games console for several hours and at the weekends. But now as I've grown up, I less time to play games, so I have to pick one or two a year that I want to play, and my one this year has been Borderlands 2. For those of you who don't know Borderlands and Borderlands 2, the whole series, it's a futuristic Western action FPS RPG.
Okay.
So you run around, you gun stuff, but like Diablo, you can pick up 87 bazillion guns, I think the official term is. Decide which equipment is better, and then go play story mode. Where it differs from most FPSs in modern day is single player is about 30 hours long, compared to Call of Duty, where you're struggling to get beyond 8 or 12. And the big appeal for me is 4-player co-op. So jumping online, especially with my brother, we did 3 hours last night. So while you guys are running battery tests, I've been playing Borderlands 2.
No fair.
But the biggest draw for me, apart from being a big fan of the original game, which I think I completed about 5 times, was the amount of technical videos that came out, particularly regarding PhysX. PhysX, the addition of secondary physics, non-important game physics, just to make it look better. I've always been quite skeptical of this technology ever since it was released. Plus, I've always been an AMD GPU user in my system. But the minute I saw the video online on YouTube, go have a look. The PhysX in Borderlands 2 is just amazing. You fire an acid gun on the floor, and acid will spew out from where you've shot. And as people and NPCs walk through it, they will disturb the gel on the floor, or you shoot the floor, and tons of rubble comes out. You shoot it with a shotgun. Tons of rubble comes out, flags waving, big explosions. It's essentially, I'm now converted into a green team NVIDIA gamer. And
Wow, that's
huge.
Thanks to,
it's the way that NVIDIA have worked with Gearbox software on this, in order to create all these immensely good-looking particle effects. Yeah. So I sort of went into playing Borderlands 2 biased because I loved the first. So if I was to write a review for AnandTech on it, it would be quite biased, I guess, in that regard.
Who better to know what's different or like changed?
Yeah.
Like I played Borderlands 1, but I couldn't finish it. I don't know. Like my attention span and the amount of work that I have, I guess, makes it really small. I don't know.
It plays on the whole role-playing game. You have to grind a little if you like. For me, games like Diablo and Counter-Strike Source, they were sort of my bread and butter when I was younger. So Borderlands 2 sort of mixes both of them up.
Gotcha.
Interesting.
Unreal Tournament 3 had the same sort of like physics secondary things. Like what was the one gun that shot green goo? I can't remember the name. This is so embarrassing, but it would do the same thing.
The biogun, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And it would like shoot out, and it was very like, I don't know, it was very rewarding to see it like splatter all over the place. Something about that one. Yeah, because I had that XPS notebook with the physics card inside.
Wow.
The Aegea one.
Yeah, back in the day. So that was like you could use this, and it would make the biogun look awesome.
Wow. Did you ever meet Manju Hegde? I guess he was the old CEO of Aegea.
No.
You have to meet him. He'd probably be really, really happy.
Yeah, well, I spent like a lot of money on that notebook, so.
Wow. Yeah, he's at AMD now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of ironic.
Well, he was at NVIDIA for a while, and then he ended up at AMD.
Wait, maybe I did meet him. Was he at a dinner at IDF a long time ago, like 2 years ago?
That isn't... Yes, you met him.
Yeah, I met him.
Yep.
We were at the table together. That's right.
Yep, you met him right when he came over to AMD, I think.
Yeah, I remember this discussion now.
Did you ever tell him that you owned one of his cards?
No, I don't think I was like... I don't think I did, but
Yeah.
I did own it. Yes, it was in there.
That's awesome.
Amazing. I'm probably going overkill on the PhysX because you can use it with something as little as 8800 GTX, really old NVIDIA cards. I've got a 560 paired with a 460, which is totally overkill. I want to replace them all top to bottom with GTX 680s. Just need some money.
So is the 560... Is that not enough to drive graphics and physics at the same time?
It's more the fact that I had a spare 460 lying around.
Okay.
So I started to stick it in and put it in as a dedicated PhysX card, which is so immensely easy to do in the NVIDIA control panel. It's like 3 clicks, and boom, I've just up all the settings on my screen size, and off you go. I mean, Brian, you played Borderlands 1, and the graphic style was sort of cartoony.
Yeah, it's
wasn't
very
it?
stylized, but it's awesome. I like different styles. I thought it was
So-
very pretty. Yeah.
So what they've done with Borderlands 2 is essentially kept the same style, but such an immense fine gloss on everything to do with lighting and, again, the additional PhysX. I'll keep talking about it because it's awesome.
I'm sure when
See-
NVIDIA finally listens to this, I think they're going to be very pleased. For years, they've been trying to get us to say that PhysX was actually useful and a worthwhile kind of addition. And this is the first time I think anyone is on our side has ever given it a glowing recommendation in any application before.
I can tell the experience that I had with Borderlands 1 on an AMD card. The game itself wasn't PhysX enabled, I don't think. But then moving to Borderlands 2 with the NVIDIA cards, it's more immersive. That's the key feature when you're talking about gaming. I quite easily happily play 3-4 hours online co-op, just as long as my brother doesn't run off and finish all the quests before I get a chance to even read what they're talking about.
Now, so here's the real question: would it push you? It sounds like it would push you to consider an NVIDIA GPU over a similarly performing, similarly priced, or maybe even a better priced AMD GPU because of this.
Yes.
Yes.
Wow, really?
If somebody came to me and said, "Look, I play games. I love Borderlands. Recommend me a GPU at this price point," I would instantly go to NVIDIA. But as a lot of games, they are GPU dependent.
So here's the other question: would your recommendation change if the person wasn't a huge Borderlands fan? Like they're going to play it, but they're not as into it as you are.
Then I'd probably consider performance and price performance.
Okay.
Or I'd ask Ryan.
He still owes me like a couple GPUs because I was like, I need more GPUs for my cache computation stuff. And there was like a 5870 that was going to go to Chris, I think. And I think it went, like I gave him my 5870 because he just needed it more.
Yeah. We'll have to follow
So
up
how
with
many
them.
how many bitcoins do you have?
I don't do Bitcoins, sadly.
Just Brian likes having lots of compute at his disposal.
Yes.
Don't we all?
Cool. Well, I think we actually made it through our entire outline without hitting the 2-hour mark, which I think is a good accomplishment. And on that note, I should get back to iPhone battery life testing and trying to forget everything Ian just said about Borderlands 2, because I have to get through this week. And
you guys got it 3 days before we did, before the rest of the world did.
Really?
So Yeah, so I was there rocking in my chair back and forth, waiting for it to unlock on Steam.
Yeah, I think I was in New York and you were in Korea, Brian, when that happened.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
No,
missed all of this.
No excuse.
I'm going to Scottsdale tomorrow to test some LTE and then meet up with people.
Yeah, that'll be cool. And
So,
yeah, I'm
am I going to have to wait until you play it and then before I decide whether I want to write a review or not?
No, I mean you can decide to write a review. I'm intrigued. I feel like for our next podcast, I need to go out and play this thing. Like it's just the issue is I need to somehow play it and have the play time not come out of the insane amount of work time that I need to put in this week, right? Because like we have something cool coming out later this week that I don't think I can talk about yet. And I still have to get through Haswell, and I have to not completely let Brian down on the iPhone 5 side. So
Yeah, you have a lot of stuff. I mean, everybody has a lot.
I can just see Brian's, hey, where's the battery life data? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I'm just not done with the battery tests yet. Ignore
I
all
wish I could help more, but there's just no LTE here.
No, that's fine. I actually, and
it's-
I've also asked Vivek to help a bit.
That's good. Yeah.
So
I mean, more data to average together, it's never going to be worse.
I agree. Anyway, so on that note, thanks for listening, and we will be back again in a week. There's going to be a lot of cool content going up on the site this week, hopefully, if we can get stuff done. And that's it.